Let me begin by telling you that the United States has five major domestic problems. Five. Number one, open borders and migration, a crisis that has many implications for many Americans. Number two, drugs, particularly drug deaths. They're connected. Fentanyl comes over our border. Fentanyl killed at least 43,000 people in 2022. The number went up in 2023, 2024. It is part of an overall drug problem that includes synthetic opioids made wholly in the United States. That problem is coming under increasing control. But fentanyl is deadly and it's flooding in. It's a three-country problem. Precursor chemicals, the stuff you make it with, come from China. It's assembled in Mexico. And some people import it from Canada. Mostly it is made in fentanyl from chemicals that come from China, but some of it comes in from Canada. Illegal migration comes from primarily Mexico, though not country of origin. It's just the border they cross is our border with Mexico. And some comes from Canada. Our two big problems then, migration and drug deaths due to fentanyl, can be traced to three countries: China, Mexico, and Canada. Donald Trump brought the tariff hammer down on all three of them this weekend. He has announced he is postponing for 30 days the hammer on Mexico, and he's talking with Justin Trudeau. Would you like talking to a wall? There's just not a lot of brilliance there. Pierre Poilievre has meanwhile announced what he'll do if he's the Prime Minister of Canada, and includes a lot more border security. But let me say, we have other issues as well. Crime, that's partially related to migration. Homelessness, which is partially related to drugs and a little bit to migration. And the collapse of public education. And I'll come to the nation's report card later in the program. But what Trump did with his tariffs, it's got nothing to do with traditional tariff policy, which, by the way, belongs to the Congress, not to the executive branch. And that would be the tariffs of Hamilton's era, the framing era, the tariffs that Lincoln liked, Civil War era tariffs, the tariffs that William McKinley liked. Those were tariffs intended to prop up American manufacturing and make it more difficult for European and other nations to import in the United States. And that's not really what we need right now. But we need national security tariffs, and they're within the authority of the president, and he is using them to achieve national security goals, primarily the control of migration and fentanyl. Good for him. My friends at the Commentary Podcast, which I listened to today, the entire way up and down the implacable hill, are just wrong. They're just wrong. They talked about tariffs only as an economic matter. As an economic matter, and this will bring me to my market report, which I'm doing early, sponsored by our friends at American Federal. And American Federal, of course, sells and buys gold. And American Federal, 1-800-221-7694, 1-800-221-7694. They're kind of, I would assume, tariff agnostics, because they don't care. It's got nothing to do with the price of gold, except gold went up today almost, well, it's up 0.81% at this hour, $2,858 an ounce. So some people say tariffs cause inflation. Other people say, no, it doesn't, not when they're targeted on national security purposes. I don't know. Dow is down a little bit. The S&P is down about a half a point. The NASDAQ is down about 0.8%. So markets don't know what to make about this either. It might result. A tariff is a very simple thing. An importer gets hit with a tariff on what they're sending for sale into the United States. The person that pays the tariff is on the receiving end. So if you're Walmart and you're buying a bunch of, let's say, Canadian maple syrup, I don't know that they do that, but maybe they do, then you're going to get hit with a 25% tariff, and your maple syrup, which might have cost $10 a bottle, is now going to cost $12.50 a bottle, and you're probably going to pass that on to your customer. So people who like Canadian maple syrup just got whacked. But that's not the point. The point isn't to raise money from Canada. The point is to leverage Canada into a more responsible role on the border and vis-a-vis fentanyl. And Pierre Poilievre, who is going to be their new prime minister because they're going to throw out the crazy socialists, got that. Apparently, Claudia Sheinbaum, who's the president of Mexico, has also talked to President Trump, and she got it. China is a whole different thing. I would tariff everything in China. They are our enemy. They are our strategic. We wouldn't do trade policy with the Nazis once we figured out who they were. We ought not to have done trade policy with the Soviets once we figured out that Stalin was not our ally anymore after 1945, but an adversary. We don't do trade with enemies, trading with the Enemy Act, that sort of stuff. We shouldn't do it. And what COVID revealed to us all is that we were supply line dependent for many critical materials, not merely PPE, protective equipment like face masks and scrubs and gloves, but pharmaceuticals. And people said, what? So to the extent that we can encourage the production of very essential products, not in China, but in the United States or somewhere else, that's good. Right? That's very good. The threatened tariff against the EU, I don't know. I don't know what the EU is doing. Doesn't sound very good. I trust Donald Trump on this. But I know that there are two kinds of tariffs. National security tariffs, and I'm all for them when applied the right way, and I think Donald Trump did. And then economic tariffs, which are across the board, and I'm not a big fan of. I'm a free trader from the Reagan era, and it's in my milk. It's in my blood. Just the more trade, the merrier. Adam Smith. But sometimes you can't trade with bad regimes, and you can ignore what those regimes are doing. Flooding your country with fentanyl, which it's probably killed millions of Americans. We don't know. Fentanyl gets mixed in with other bad substances, and kids especially are prone to order a Valium or a one pill online because they're studying hard for a test, find out it's got fentanyl in it, either become addicted or die. One pill can kill. Mrs. Youngkin, the First Lady of Virginia, started that in Virginia. Don't buy one kill on the dark web. Don't do that. Don't buy one pill on the dark. It could kill you. Now, I also want to say that gold is the great teller of no tales. When gold goes up, there's inflation in the wind. It's gone up a little bit. So maybe tariffs will cause inflation. Maybe not. I'll watch it all week long. You should as well. But the reason I buy gold every year at the same time, in January, I bought gold from Nick Rovich and American Federal this year, last month, 1-800-221-7694, is I'm a dollar cost averaging guy. Buy the same thing at the same time every year or every quarter or every month, and you're likely to average out over time. You won't buy in a dip, or you won't buy in a swing up. You'll buy in the middle over time. That's why you do it that way. Some of you want to sell gold. That's fine too. Nick does that. But it's so honest, so transparent. I wanted to let you know that going in. But when you hear people talk about tariffs, here's Donald Trump talking about tariffs in the Oval Office today, cut number 2.
We've disagreed before, and I'm sure they didn't have any idea what they were talking about, because already you see what's happening. Look at Colombia. Look at what happened with that. Everybody said that with Colombia it was going to be a disaster. In one hour, everything was settled. You know why? Tariffs. Without tariffs, they wouldn't have been the same way. They would not have treated me the way they treated me, which was extremely nicely. And I don't want to use countries, I don't want to use names, but tariffs are very powerful, both economically and in getting everything else you want. Tariffs for us, nobody can compete with us because we're the pot of gold. But if we don't keep winning and keep doing well, we won't be the pot of gold, and then tariffs won't be so good for us.
Then he went on to say about Mexico and Canada, cut number 6.
Is there any chance that Canada or China could also get out of the tariffs after you start to deal with Mexico?
Well, nobody's out with Mexico. We had a great talk with Mexico, and we had President Sheinbaum is a woman. I like her very much. We've had good relationships, but we have to stop fentanyl from coming in, whether I like somebody or not, and we have to stop the illegal aliens from coming in. I think we've lost 200,000 people on average a year for many years, much higher than the 100,000, could be even closer to 300,000. And they've agreed to put in 10,000 soldiers permanently, like forever, 10,000 soldiers at their side of the border and stop fentanyl and illegal aliens from coming into our country. They have a big incentive to do. Other than that, we've agreed to talk and consider various other things. We haven't agreed on tariffs yet, and maybe we will, maybe we won't. But we have a very good relationship. I also spoke with...
Okay, pause it on Canada. We'll come back to Canada. Oh, Canada. Sorry, Russ, sorry, Aaron, but they have it coming to them. Maybe Pierre will fix it. This is the day the music died. Richie Valens went down in a plane in 1959, I think, along with the Big Bopper and others. Something Olivia Beavers, Wall Street Journal reporter, probably doesn't know. Did you know that, Olivia?
No, but I thought, what a somber way to start my segment with you.
I know.
The day the music
we always
died.
do our rock and roll tributes on the second segment. Olivia, I very rarely give you the questions in advance, but these were tricky questions, so I did. I'm just wondering, we're down to a 2-vote margin in the House because Matt Gaetz quit, Michael Waltz went to the White House, and Elise Stefanik's going to the UN. When are the special elections to fill those 3 seats?
So the special general election for Florida with Gaetz and Waltz's seat will be April 1st, which is actually April Fool's Day. And they, in that case, they're both red seats. They're expected to stay red for the most part, unless there is, as some Democrats have been quoted as saying, some sort of small or large miracle, depending on which district. But you have Jimmy Patronis and Randy Fine who won those. It's a little bit more complicated for Stefanik's seat. After she resigns, the governor has to declare a special election within 10 days. And then the election must take place 80 to 90 days after that declaration. But there's been some interesting reporting happening on the local level where you have local Democrats who are trying to discuss ways to basically push that deadline back, maybe into June. And the governor's office is not dismissing that. They're arguing it would help with turnout and be more cost effective. So there's probably some political scheming also happening there, because I'm sure if it was in reverse with Democrats, you might not actually be seeing that kind of discussion taking place. But that is underway for Stefanik's office.
But it's a red district, right? Eventually it will come back. Okay. The reason I bring it up is the Republicans may need all 5 seats filled in order to push a budget reconciliation package through, depending on what's in it and who doesn't like it. The House Republican retreat you went down to, what was the discussion there about one big beautiful bill versus 2, and what goes in it?
So there still seems to be a divide in the party. House Republicans, especially Jason Smith, who's the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, he's pushing one bill. His argument is basically if there's 2 bills, he doesn't think that they can get Trump's tax cuts passed through the House with a narrow majority, even if they gain those seats. And so he wants to package energy, border, Trump's tax cuts all in one, quote, big, beautiful bill. But when Trump was down there, he basically publicly said, I don't care if it's 1 bill or 2. I just want it to get done. And so we were, as reporters, chasing after different Republican members being like, did that kind of undermine your push for a 1 big bill? And they go, no, we're still standing by this. We still want 1 bill. But that doesn't mean that they might ultimately get jammed by the Senate, which is a fear in the House that if they can't come up with a bill that they all agree on, which you're having this discussion about how many cuts, how little cuts, then they might end up having to sort of eat the Senate plan. And there's supposed to be a budget hearing this week, but it hasn't been scheduled. And it's sort of coming in a sign that Republicans on that committee and more broadly just can't seem to figure out where their sweet spot is in terms of cuts.
Now, I always refer to it as the budget reconciliation process because it's more than 1 bill. First step, you got to get a budget. Second step, it's got to get through both houses and be agreed upon. And then reconciliation bills are not guaranteed, but they only require a simple majority in the Senate. So the first big deal is the budget. Who chairs budget in the House? I know Jason Crow Jason Smith is chair of Ways and Means. That's the tax committee. But who runs budget?
Yep. So you have Jody Arrington, who's the chairman of the budget committee, and if you talk to his colleagues, most of them will say that he has perhaps the hardest job next to Mike Johnson, because you have some Republicans on the committee who are pushing to not even just have a deficit neutral bill, but one that would even take care of the interest that's happening. And so that's like a major haul. And some of the Republicans I talked to are doubtful that there's even the math there unless you start talking about Social Security, talking about all these going too intensely into Medicare and Medicaid, which Trump does not want to touch for the most part. And so they're trying to figure out where the numbers are in a realistic way. You have conservatives, definitely, the Chip Roys saying they want even more intense cuts. And then you have centrists on the other hand, more like the Don Bacon types, who are warning that too severe of cuts would hurt them in terms of keeping their seat and when they run for re-election and keeping the House majority.
Now, the solution that fixes everything is to raise more revenue and to agree on a deficit number. The last time they did reconciliation, I think Pat Toomey and his counterpart in the House said, okay, we'll do $1.5 trillion in red ink over 10 years. And that's a budget. They can do that again. They can do $3.5 trillion in red ink if they want. They can do whatever they want, but the more revenue you bring in, that's why I want the one-time window on the conversion of Roth and 401 the conversion of IRA and 401ks to Roth IRAs to be the present discounted value of whatever tax revenue they bring in over the next 40 years. So they have a big pile of money. Did any of this revenue idea get put on the table? We don't want tax hikes, but you can tax gambling and dope. There's a lot you can tax that we don't tax at the federal level.
The last time I was on your show, you asked me if that was part of the conversation, and I was like, did I just not hear about it? So I went back and I asked some Republicans whether there was, as you said, some sort of discussion about vice tax, and the answer was no, that's not really part of the dialogue. They said they actually had seen it. Some of the people I talked to said they had seen it coming from you first versus like it actually being within the ethers. So I don't know that that's actually active, but they are aware that you have put it forward.
Jason and I talked about it on air, so I just know that they're stuck on revenue and they're stuck with the Freedom Caucus, and they've got to get a plan or there's not going to be anything, right?
Oh, yeah, they need a plan. And they set probably too much of an aggressive plan of thinking that they could have this wrapped up by the end of February, which already we're seeing probably signs of a delay if they can't even have their budget meeting for the blueprint wrapped up or even scheduled for this week. So if that starts happening, I'm sure even once a plan is out there, you're going to see what we typically see for something so big like this, which is once it's public, you're going to start hearing from the base, you're going to start hearing from the Freedom Caucus, you're going to start hearing from all these different entities in the party. And it might mean that they have to go back to the drawing board, or there's some closed door, backdoor negotiations of saying, well, I want this, but we can give on this. And that's going to take time.
So, Olivia, just to put a dot on it, April 1,
Yeah.
2 more Republicans come to Congress. Third new Republican doesn't show up for time certain, right?
We don't know about when Stefanik is. Part of that would rely on when she resigns and if the local Democrats are able to push it back.
Okay. Always a good thing to talk to Olivia Beavers. Follow her on X at Olivia_Beavers. She's with the Wall Street Journal, and I appreciate her every single Monday. This is John Androzik's homage to Don McLean's American Pie, which was an homage to Richie Valens and the Big Bopper and everybody else who died in the winter tour crash on this date in 1959. And I've always liked more than just a flight to American Pie. You know what I don't like? I don't like pharmaceutical industry lobbyists. I want to make sure I'm very, very clear. I love Big Pharma. I don't like Big Pharma in D.C. I like Big Pharma creating drugs. I like Big Pharma solving the world's miseries. I love the fact that Big Pharma in the United States is responsible for saving lives in America and around the world all the time. Hate their lobbyists. Their lobbyists come into town. They got bags of gold because Big Pharma makes a lot of money, and that's okay. You invent something new, and you get X number of years, I think it's 7, but I can't remember, of patent protection to just own the market and sell at a high price, whatever it is, until someone can knock off your drug after it becomes a generic drug. But Big Pharma always wants more. And Big Pharma, because they're big and they throw their weight around in D.C., rolled us on Obamacare. And Obamacare has really ruined American health care in many significant ways. Whether or not they'll ever admit it, I don't know, but it did. Big Pharma got their slice of the pie. Now they want to keep competition low, and they want to keep drug prices too high, even after their patents expire. That's why PharmaWindfall.com was created by conservatives for lower healthcare costs, a sponsor of my show. And I want you to go over there to make sure your name is added to those who do not want high-priced brand-name drugs not running into the competition that typically has been triggered after a time certain when they can make their money back. And it does cost a lot of money to make a drug. They need that 7 or 8 or 9 year window, I don't know what it is, to sell this drug exclusively before other people just loot it and generically produce it and sell it for a dime on the dollar. So I'm not against pharma making profits. I'm against the pharma windfall. That's why I say go to PharmaWindfall.com. I want to go back to the end of Donald Trump talking about tariffs. Cut number 6, the end of it when he's talking about Canada.
Prime Minister Trudeau of Canada, and we had a good talk in the morning, but I did ask him a couple of questions like, banks aren't allowed to do business in Canada. Canada is very tough. Canada is very, we're not treated well by Canada, and we have to be treated well.
Oh, good. Pretty simple. Meanwhile, we got J.D. Vance talking about Canada, too. And cut number 9.
These tariffs will go into effect tomorrow. Yep. 25% on Canada and Mexico, 10% on China. Are you expecting retaliation?
We'll see what happens, but I think, unfortunately, the retaliation has already happened. The problem with this whole idea that they're going to retaliate is they have already been taking advantage of America for decades. The retaliation is Donald Trump saying no more. We're not going to be taken advantage of anymore, and I think it's important the president is doing what he's doing. Now, look, it looks different ways and comes in different forms, whether you're talking about Canada or China or Mexico. We know that Mexico has allowed the facilitation of the illegal drug trade and illegal sex trafficking for years and has done nothing about it. If they want to be a better partner to us, the time starts now. We know the Chinese, of course, have stolen American manufacturing jobs for 30, 40 years, and also that they facilitated the trafficking of illegal fentanyl into Mexico, where the drug cartels then bring it into our country. We are sick of being taken advantage of. We still have, thank God, the biggest economy in the entire world, the best people and the best workers. But the message from President Trump to the entire world is very clear. We are done being taken advantage of, and we have a president who looks out for the interests of American citizens. Thank God we do, and we're going to try to do it the best we can.
He's in East Palestine today. I'd hoped to talk to him. Didn't happen. Buddy Holly on that fateful plane crash in 1959 on February 3rd. Bad day, the day the music died. So Buckeyes are Buckeyes, whether they're from, look, I really don't think Cincinnati's in Ohio, but some people claim it is. But Middletown is. That's where J.D. Vance, the vice president, is from. I'm from Warren, and Middletown is sort of south central. Warren is northeastern. Northeastern Ohio rocked today because Myles Garrett said he wanted to be traded from the Browns. Big shot to the head. We'll see if that happens. But meanwhile, much more seriously, Vice President Vance went to East Palestine, cited a terrible trail derailment, which Joe Biden never went to. And I think Pete Buttigieg showed up like 8 weeks later. I don't know. But J.D. Vance, second week of the vice presidency, he went to East Palestine, cut number 10.
The president loves this community. Of course, he visited himself personally. And President Trump just wanted to deliver a message that this community will not be forgotten, will not be left behind, and we are in it for the long haul in East Palestine. What does that mean? Well, one thing it means is that, of course, the environmental cleanup has to get done. It's a tragedy and a shame that it wasn't done during the last administration, but I guarantee we're going to finish the cleanup during this administration under the great leadership of Lee Zeldin, our new EP administrator who stands behind me. And I also think that part of that means the long-term economic development of this community. We know that a lot of local businesses and a lot of local people lost a lot when that train disaster happened a couple of years ago. We are committed not just to finishing the environmental side of the cleanup, but hopefully seeing East Palestine build back better and stronger and more prosperous than it was before this disaster happened in the first place.
Now, the village of East Palestine is not very big. Like I said, it's 40 miles kind of southeast of Warren. And we would play the Bulldogs, the Eagles. Warren Kennedy Eagles would play the Bulldogs, I don't know, every third or fourth year, maybe in the division whatever, basketball playoffs. I don't think we got hammered by them in football, but they're about roughly the size of JFK, so knew about the Bulldogs. And I'm glad that he's there, really glad that he's there. And doesn't matter that JD's from South Ohio and not a Northeastern Ohio guy. He's there, and he mentioned getting the cleanup done. Now, this is the problem with the EPA. They don't ever finish a Superfund. They never finish anything. And I'm very glad to hear we're going to be finishing that. Now, speaking of Ohio, I have to tell you a little sports story that's not related to bad news. Luka Doncic was traded from the Mavericks last night. Maybe the worst trade in sports history, which I'm glad about because that will remove the Watson trade from being the worst trade in sports history. But the Browns are a mess. They're an absolute mess. But the Guardians are pretty good. So I'm out to dinner last night, fetching Mrs. Hewitt, and I drove down to Newport Beach to have dinner with a friend who was leaving from John Wayne Airport. And we were in Newport Beach, near the water, wonderful restaurant. As I'm leaving, I make eye contact, oh so briefly, with someone who I think I know who it is, but I'm not sure. And I'm not one of those guys to say, are you? Kept walking. He kind of looked at me like, are you? Kept walking. Later on, he posts, were you at this restaurant? And I said, yeah, I was. And it was Jim Palmer, Hall of Famer. And Jim Palmer is one of those guys I wouldn't know how to talk to. Like when Dennis Eckersley popped up at the White House Correspondents Association and said, Hugh Hewitt, Dennis Eckersley, I'm a big fan. All I could go is, sports heroes. Jim Palmer, I think, is the only major leaguer to win a World Series game in 3 decades. So he's late 60s, all of the 70s, into the 80s. He won 20 games again and again and again. He's an Earl Weaver guy. And the Orioles were really good. He's a Hall of Famer. So we're going to get together a little bit later, sometime before I leave. And he's got to go back and call the Orioles games. He's an announcer. So we're in the same business. I didn't talk to him about announcing. That's what I can't talk to him about pitching. I don't know anything about pitching. I watch pitching. I cannot pitch. I don't even throw out the first pitch at games. But it was still kind of fun. I also want to go to what Marco Rubio said today about USAID, because I love this so much, we could play it twice. Cut number 14.
What's happening with USAID and how that affects your frustration? Well, look, I mean, my frustration with USAID goes back to my time in Congress. It's a completely unresponsive agency. It's supposed to respond to policy directives of the State Department, and it refuses to do so. So the functions of USAID, there are a lot of functions of USAID that are going to continue, that are going to be part of American foreign policy, but it has to be aligned with American foreign policy. I said very clearly during my confirmation hearing that every dollar we spend and every program we fund, will be aligned with the national interest of the United States. And USAID has a history of sort of ignoring that and deciding that there's somehow a global charity separate from the national interest. These are taxpayer dollars. And so I'm very troubled by these reports that they've been unwilling to cooperate with people who are asking simple questions about what does this program do, who gets the money, who are our contractors, who's funded, and that sort of level of insubordination makes it impossible to conduct the sort of mature and serious review that I think foreign aid writ large should have. We're spending taxpayer money here. These are not donor dollars. These are taxpayer dollars, and we owe the American people the assurances that every dollar we are spending abroad is being spent on something that furthers our national interest. And And so far, a lot of the people that work at USAID have just simply refused to cooperate.
Are you currently in charge of USAID, or are you acting?
I'm the acting director of USAID.
That's all you need to know.
Delegated that.
Here's the boss working on behalf of the president, and if Donald Trump sends Elon Musk and the Musketeers over to scope the books, open the door. Last year, USAID spent $17 billion on Ukraine, $3.3 billion on Israel, $1.7 billion on Jordan, $1.5 billion on Egypt, $1.5 billion on Ethiopia, $1.2 billion on Somalia, $1 billion on Nigeria, $990 million on Congo. This one kind of surprised me. $886 billion on Afghanistan, $846 billion on Kenya. All right. I don't know if Congress ordered that. If Congress ordered that, the executive must deliver. But to whom did they deliver? By whom? With what degree of certainty that it wasn't being siphoned off? And just fold it into the State Department. There's only one executive branch. Congress can legislate and Congress can vote foreign aid, but there's only one executive branch. They all answer to the president. They're not an independent agency. If anyone says burp, fire them. This is over. There is no more permanent administrative state making up its own rules. There's one executive branch. Get with the program or get going. Last night, Donald Trump returned to Washington, D.C., did a 9.5-minute press conference availability on the tarmac. And he showed up in the EO Oval Office today and signed a bunch of EOs. Let's go to the Oval Office. I'll try and get to the tarmac gaggle later. But here is the president this morning, cut number 3, talking about the FBI.
Mr. President, on a different topic, questionnaires have been going out to FBI agents across the country who were involved potentially in the investigation. Do you believe anyone involved at any level should be fired, sir?
Well, I think the FBI was a very corrupt institution, and I'm a victim of it in a true sense. I was able to beat it, but other people have been treated horribly. I think the FBI had a great reputation. I think its reputation was really damaged badly, as is DOJ. Look at what they've done in terms of weaponization. Look at what they've done to a political opponent. Probably got me elected by what they did, or I think I was doing well anyway, but they might have got me elected. But you know what? We have to have pristine, beautiful, perfect law enforcement. And what we want to do, and Cash is the one to do it. He's the one guy that is going to do it. We have to bring the reputation of the FBI. We have to bring the fact of the FBI back to what it could be. Not even to what it was, even better than it ever was. Because who would have thought that the FBI could have been corrupted like they were corrupted? Who would have thought that would have happened? Who would have thought they would have been used to go after, political opponents, essentially, but me being the number one, and so many other things beyond that. And they've been hurt very badly, and we'll see what happens. But Cash is the one to do it, and I hear he's doing very well. Cash will straighten it out. We have great confidence that we can make
thought that the FBI could be worse than Hoover at his worst. But it was, but it won't be. President also spoke about USAID, cut number 5.
The first term, though, USAID was something that you liked in some respects.
I love the concept of it.
That's a program.
Sure, I love the concept, but they turned out to be radical left lunatics. And the concept of it is good, but it's all about the people.
What do you really think, Mr. President? Yeah, they are radical left lunatics. And if Congress doesn't earmark foreign aid, I'm not for it. Then Congress can earmark, and even then USAID, they're not their own little State Department. One more cut. This one's a little bit ominous. Donald Trump talking about the ceasefire in the Middle East, cut number 8.
On the Middle East, Mr. President, if I may, do you still have doubts that the ceasefire will hold?
On what?
On the Middle East, do you think the ceasefire will hold?
I have no assurances that it'll hold. I mean, I've seen people brutalized. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. No, I have no guarantees that the peace is going to hold. Steve, you might want to say something about that. Steve Woodcock.
It's holding so far. So, and we're certainly hopeful, and that's the president's direction. Get the hostages out and save lives and come to hopefully a peaceful settlement of it all. So far it's holding.
So far. I got to tell you, my new hero is Gaddy Moses, the 80-year-old, who smirked at the terrorist as he left and argued with him for 16 long months in isolation, hidden in dark cells underground. He's a hero. Last night, Sunday night, Donald Trump got off an airplane and did something we haven't seen for 4 years. Joe Biden was infirm, and we all know that. Intellectually disabled by the end, and we all know that. Not Donald Trump, neither infirm nor lacking any of his marbles. He did a full 10 minutes. I can't play it all, but let's just give you a sense of it by dead rolling some of Donald Trump at the tarmac last night, cut number 1.
Thank you very much, Joe. We had a very busy weekend. We got the 6 hostages out of Venezuela, as you probably know, and they're very safe right now. They're home with their families, and we appreciate the hard work of a lot of people, including Rick Grinnell. We appreciate the cooperation from Venezuela, and we have some very happy people right now. Nobody thought that was going to happen. So they are home, they're safe, and they're with their families. That was a big one. Secretary of State Rubio is in Panama right now, and we're talking about the Panama Canal. What they've done is terrible. They violated the agreement. They're not allowed to violate the agreement. China's running the Panama Canal. That was not given to China. That was given to Panama foolishly. But they violated the agreement, and we're going to take it back, or something very powerful is going to happen. And as far as other things are concerned, as you know, we had a very busy weekend. We're dealing with this.
Pause there for a moment. Secretary of State Rubio came back and said, look, they're going to kick the Chi-Coms off the canal. That's the loose translation out of Diplo speak. Chinese communists are going to be out of the canal. That's a win. Keep going.
We're dealing with Ukraine and Russia. We have meetings and talks scheduled with various parties, including Ukraine and Russia. And I think those discussions are actually going pretty well. The discussions on the Middle East with Israel and various and sundry other countries are progressing. Bibi Netanyahu is coming on Tuesday, and I think we have some very big meetings scheduled.
President, do you feel that Elon Musk is delivering on his promises to you? Do you feel he's doing a good job right now?
I do. I think Elon's doing a good job. He's a big cost cutter. Sometimes we won't agree with it and we'll not go where he wants to go, but I think he's doing a great job. He's a smart guy, very smart, and he's very much into cutting the budget of our federal government.
Mr. President. He saw some retaliatory tariffs from Canada.
Say it?
He saw some retaliatory tariffs from Canada. There was a rider in the order. Are you planning to increase the tariffs against Canada?
Well, it could happen. If they do anything, we will. Canada's been very abusive of the United States.
Canada's been very abusive. MyPhDWeightLoss.com is our sponsor. Dwayne, has Canada abused you? Is that why you had to use My PhD Weight Loss? Did you eat all their Canadian maple syrup?
No, I did not. I did not gorge myself on Canadian food imports.
How about Canadian bacon?
I have used Canadian bacon at times to make Eggs Benedict for my wife.
Is that part of the My PhD Weight
No,
Loss?
because I don't eat the Eggs Benedict.
864-644-1900. If you want to lose 50 pounds. Well, how long did it take you to lose 50 pounds?
About 12 weeks.
12 weeks. You kept it out for 2 years. 864-644-1900. No drugs?
No.
No drugs.
No drugs. Wouldn't do it. Wouldn't be prudent.
Wouldn't be prudent. Not going to do it. Dwayne didn't do it. He's skinny Dwayne now. He's a shadow. Big shadow of his former self, but he's a shadow. Me and my shadow. If I had a producer, if he does lose. The producer came up. MyPhDWeightLoss.com. Give it a try.
864-644-1900.
If I had a producer, I'd have a shorter cut of Pierre Polyev with a Canadian plan, but all I have is 5 minutes and 33 seconds, so let's go to cut 17.
Borders. They are the protective arms wrapped around a people and a land to stop foreign threats and protect against enemies. They mark our place and stake out our ground as a people and country. But in 9 years, the NDP Liberals have lost control of our borders, letting drugs, guns, and terrorists threaten our people. Part incompetence, and part their radical, borderless, globalist post-national agenda.
Speaking as a European.
Here are the facts. Fact. After 9 years of Liberals, gun-related crime is up 116%, with Toronto police saying that over 80% of the gun offenses use illegal firearms from the United States. Fact. The Liberal government only inspects 1% of shipping containers coming into our country, allowing drugs and guns to sneak through in the other 99%. Fact. The Liberals let in multiple ISIS terrorists to Canada, including a man allegedly filmed cutting up a human body on a crucifix in the Middle East. The same man is now charged with planning a terrorist attack in Canada. Fact. The Liberal government admits it has lost count of the number of people who are in Canada illegally. But one government report estimated that it's anywhere between 20,000 or 500,000. But it could be more. Fact. 49,000 Canadians have died of opioid overdoses in the last 9 years, with many of those deadly drug ingredients coming in over our border through our ports from China and Mexico. Fact. Canadian security services have identified 350 organized crime rings operating within Canada's borders. 63 of these groups have international connections to China, Mexico, and other nations. Fact. In British Columbia, police recently discovered a super lab containing enough fentanyl and materials to kill 95 million people, more than killing our entire population twice. Fact. In the year leading up to September 2024, U.S. border agents seized 11,600 pounds of drugs coming from Canada. Fentanyl seizures tripled between 2023 and 2024. Even our neighbors have noticed. President Trump's administration has raised concerns and has put that as a rationale for imposing tariffs on Canada. These tariffs and these threats are wrong and unjustified, but it should not take a leader of a foreign country for the Liberals to scramble to fix their disastrous, broken border policy. I will take back control of our borders.
Thank you, Pierre. I hope you win. I hope you win a landslide. Doug Burgum, yesterday with Fox Brian Kilmeade, laid it out. What are these tariffs about? Cut number 11.
Well, certainly it's an incentive for Americans to say, let's get going on producing energy here. But you saw the lower tariff on Canadian energy. I mean, this reflects President Trump thoughtfully considering the impacts on American, but still putting pressure on those related to the border. I mean, this isn't a trade war with Canada or Mexico or China. This is about fentanyl. I mean, we've had mass invasion of our country, and we've been taking mass casualties. We lose almost 300 people a day to overdose deaths in this country. That's a tragedy. President Trump wants it to end, and that's what these tariffs began with. That is about securing our border from both a legal entry, but also because of the drugs that are killing our Americans.
Thank you, Secretary Burgum. Secretary Rubio also spoke to this yesterday. Cut number 13.
Recognize that many of the people who seek mass migration are often victims and victimized along the way. It's not good for anyone. The only people who benefit from mass migration are traffickers. And so this is a program that shows how cooperating with our strong allies here in Panama can help to stem the flow by creating a disincentive, by sending a clear message that if you come and you come irregularly, you may be stopped and you may be returned to your country of origin.
Good for him. Finally, Vice President Vance with Maria Bartiromo yesterday on why drastic action was necessary on tariffs. Cut number 9.
These tariffs will go into effect tomorrow. 25% on Canada and Mexico, 10% on China. Are you expecting retaliation?
We'll see what happens, but I think, unfortunately, the retaliation has already happened. The problem with this whole idea that they're going to retaliate is they have already been taking advantage of America for decades. The retaliation is Donald Trump saying no more. We're not going to be taken advantage of anymore, and I think it's important the president is doing what he's doing. Now, look, it looks different ways and comes in different forms, whether you're talking about Canada or China or Mexico. We know that Mexico has allowed the facilitation of the illegal drug trade trade and illegal sex trafficking for years and has done nothing about it. If they want to be a better partner to us, the time starts now. We know the Chinese, of course, have stolen American manufacturing jobs for 30, 40 years, and also that they facilitated the trafficking of illegal fentanyl into Mexico, where the drug cartels then bring it into our country. We are sick of being taken advantage of. We still have, thank God, the biggest economy in the entire world, the best people and the best workers. But the message from President Trump to the entire world is very clear. We are done being taken advantage of, and we have a president who looks out for the interests of American citizens. Thank God we do,
the Vice
and we're going to try to do it the best we can.
The people who manipulated an infirm President Biden are gone. New boss in town, new A-team in town, and they're serious. Joined by United States Senator Tom Cotton, chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. He's the author of this brand new book, 7 Things You Can't Say About China. For the next 7 weeks, I'll be doing a chapter a week with Senator Cotton, involving as well news as it breaks. Just so happens. Senator, welcome. Good to have you.
Hey, Hugh, it's good to be back on with you. Yeah, thank you there for noticing that 7 Things You Can't Say About China will be coming out, I think, in just 2 weeks from tomorrow.
And I have the advanced copy, and I love the fact that you call it a techno-totalitarian state. And I also love the fact that it's timely. President Trump announced a 10% tariff on China. I hope it goes higher. It is the one that is producing the precursor chemicals that are killing hundreds of thousands of Americans. And there are lots of reasons not to like China. But let's just start there. The tariffs are long overdue, and I hope he raises them.
Yeah, Hugh, there's no question about that. I write about it in 7 Things You Can't Say About China. I write at one point that one of the things that you can't say about China is it's coming for our kids. You can see that through TikTok. You can see in the way it manipulates secondary and post-secondary curriculum and influences our education. But you can also see it in what I call the reverse opium war, that China has basically been waging a reverse opium war against American kids now for decades, sending fentanyl itself into Mexico to the drug cartels for many years, and now lately sending in the precursors to fentanyl so they can deny sending fentanyl itself. It all gets back to China waging a reverse opium war as if American teenagers were responsible for what British colonialists did 170 years ago.
Now, Senator, when you put this out there, I'm sure the Chinese Communist government's not going to like you very much, but you recount in Chapter 1 the slow-motion genocide against the Tibetan people, the fast genocide against the Uyghurs, the repression of Hong Kong. It is the persecution of Christians, of Falun Gong. There just isn't any doubt about it. It's a Leninist totalitarian state, and I don't think there's any doubt. Does anyone still try and argue like we did for many years when Deng Xiaoping had faked us?
Oh, sure, Hugh. Many of China's toadies in corporate America or in the influence industry in Washington, on college campuses in Wall Street and Hollywood, still try to say that it's not really communist, it's not Marxist-Leninist, it's reformed. And this is the way the entire establishment sold the soft on China policy going back 40 years, that if we would just help China, get wealthy, send our jobs and our factories there, as China liberalized economically, they would liberalize politically. We now know that the exact opposite happened. We funded the growing wealth and military of maybe the most formidable enemy we've ever faced in our history, and they've gotten even more repressive. And with advanced technology, they have become not just a totalitarian nation, but a techno-totalitarian nation, given control over its own people and the ability to torment its people that Soviet Russia never had. And that first chapter in 7 Things You Can't Say About China is the most fundamental thing, which is that China is an evil empire. And you can never forget that China is an evil empire when you're looking at all the other things you're not supposed to say about China, that it's preparing for war, that it's waging economic world war, that it's infiltrated American society, and that most alarmingly, China could win. If we don't take the threat seriously.
We will go through one at a time over the next 7 weeks, but I do want to pause on one story that illustrates how crafty they are. They got TikTok and Gen Z and Gen Alpha hooked on it, and there are economic downsides to if it's not being sold, being shut down, but it will be shut down if it's not sold. However, they announced DeepSeek a week ago today, and it became the most downloaded app in the United States. I guess we're just dummies. And I chewed out, I lost it in my class. It's like inviting a spy to come in and live in your house.
Yes, indeed. The announcement of DeepSeek and the supposed amount of money it costs and the supposed amount of computing power it required, I think, is very suspect and fishy. I think it calls for careful scrutiny. It also, though, immediately highlights some of the things we've been talking about from 7 Things You Can't Say About China. Ask DeepSeek what happened in Tiananmen Square.
Yes.
Ask it about the Uyghur genocide. Ask it about the Tibetan genocide. Ask it about Falun Gong. And it'll either give you no answer or it will give you propaganda. And that's the exact problem that China has with anything like artificial intelligence, is it has to crack down to maintain control over the information that is always exerted over its own people. And I just think in the end, that's going to make it hard for China to beat us in this realm. Not impossible, but harder, but not for lack of trying.
And finally, Senator, you mentioned in the introduction, you were talking about COVID being manufactured in a lab early on this show. I think in January, if not, and then February of 2020, you were the first to the ramparts on this. Does anyone note that when they talk about 7 things you can't say in China? Or is it too early to say because the book doesn't drop for 2 weeks?
Well, yeah, the book hasn't dropped, but I do think with the CIA's recent conclusion during the FBI and the Department of Energy's intelligence unit that COVID almost certainly originated in those labs in Wuhan, as opposed to, I don't know, happening from a bat kissing a aardvark or something in the food market in Wuhan, that's going to be a renewed source of interest. And I think the real question becomes, not who is right and who is wrong, but rather what are we going to do to hold China accountable for it?
Now,
this is just one more crime in the long litany of crimes that Chinese communism has inflicted on the world.
Now, you know Senator Rubio pretty well now, Secretary of State Rubio. He's the acting head of AID. He said they're going to run it the right way or shut it down. What do you think about that? I'm all for it, but Senator Rubio, what do you think? Will he follow through on this?
I do. I do think it's important to have such a high-profile, politically accountable person acting at AID. There are things that AID does that advances our national interest, but there's a lot it does, Hugh, that does not advance our national interest. In fact, we're counter to our national interest, and there's a lot that's just inherently wasteful. A lot of money that gets spent on bureaucrats and nonprofits in the AID nonprofit industrial complex, if you will, that never gets to a single person in need all around the world, and certainly not in any strategically beneficial way. So I think there could be substantial, sweeping reforms at AID under President Trump that will actually make sure our foreign aid dollars, to the extent we're spending it, helps countries that are pro-American where we have strategic interests.
Last question.
Wasted.
Why did we send $886 billion to Afghanistan last year?
I don't think it was $1 billion, as of you. That's the size of the Department of Defense. $1 million?
Yeah, it's billion. Oh, no, it's $886 million. I'm sorry. It's $886 million.
That is a good question that I suspect Senator Rubio will work on getting to the bottom of. And I think a lot of that money was rushed out in the days after the election as well. Again, it's just another example of how so much of the money that comes through AID, if it gets beyond the pockets of its own bureaucracy or its NGO complex, doesn't really go to support America's interests abroad.
Well, you were right. It's only $886 million. I like to be correct. This is the date of the day the music died. Big Bopper went down along with many other rock and rollers, 1959. I want to play for you the rest of President Trump on the tarmac last night because we've grown so unaccustomed to hearing from the president in a casual way. But that's what Donald Trump excels at. Let's pick it up where we left it off on the tarmac last night.
They don't allow our banks. Did you know that? Canada does not allow banks to go in. If you think about it, that's pretty amazing. If we have a U.S. bank, they don't allow them to go in. Canada's been very tough on oil, on energy. They don't allow our farm products in, essentially. They don't allow a lot of things in, and we allow everything to come in. It's been a one-way street. We subsidize Canada by the tune of about $200 billion a year. And for what? What do we get out of it? We don't get anything out of it. I love the people of Canada. I disagree with the leadership of Canada, and something's going to happen there. But if they want to play the game, I don't mind. We can play the game all they want. Mexico, we've had very good talks with them, and this is retaliatory. This is retaliatory to a certain extent. Millions of people flowed into our country through Mexico and Canada, and we're not going to allow that. And by the way, we have among the lowest numbers we've ever had of people crossing our border, the lowest numbers since my administration.
Mr. President, you said, so on Truth Social, you said that you were going to cut aid from South Africa. Will you plan to cut aid across other African nations, and why South Africa?
No, it's only South Africa. Terrible things are happening in South Africa. The leadership is doing some terrible things, horrible things. So that's under investigation right now. We'll make a determination. And until such time as we find out what South Africa is doing, they're taking away land, they're confiscating land, and actually they're doing things that are perhaps far worse than that.
And on the Fed Chair Jerome Powell, he held rates. What's your reaction to him not changing the rates?
What did you say?
Fed Chair Jerome Powell, the Fed meeting was this week. He held the rates. He didn't cut them.
No, I'm not surprised. I think holding the rates at this point was the right thing to do.
Mr. President, which country will be next on tariffs? Would you consider taxing the UK, for example?
Well, we're going to see what happens. It'll happen. But we're going to, we'll see how things work out. It might happen with them, but it will definitely happen with the European Union. I can tell you that, because they've really taken advantage of us. And, you know, we have over a $300 billion deficit. They don't take our cars. They don't take our farm products. They take almost nothing. And we take everything from them. Millions of cars, tremendous amounts of food and farm products. So the UK is way out of line, and we'll see. The UK, but European Union is really out of line. UK is out of line, but I'm sure that one, I think that one can be worked out. But the European Union it's an atrocity, what they've done. Well, Prime Minister Starmer has been very nice. We've had a couple of meetings. We've had numerous phone calls. We're getting along very well. And we'll see whether or not we can balance out our budget. With the European Union, it's $350 billion deficit. So obviously something's going to take place there.
For the European Union, what's the timeline? And are you thinking along the line 25%?
With who? With who?
The EU, how much?
I wouldn't say there's a timeline, but it's going to be pretty soon. No.
They're running out of questions.
We may have short-term.
It's unfortunate. Whenever I'm ready with Donald Trump to talk to the president, I've got 500 questions because you don't know how long he's going to talk to you for, and you want to hit good news. They were just going abba dabba 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 because they're so used to Joe Biden shuffling by and not saying anything. Those are over. Vic Mattis is not old enough to know about the winter dance party that ended in a fiery crash the day the music died on this date, 1959. Are you, Vic?
No, but I know a little bit about that. Clear Lake, Iowa, the Big Bopper, Richie Valens, and Buddy Holly, and not Waylon Jennings.
Not Waylon Jennings. He lost his seat on the plane, had to go on the bad bus. Vic, I was listening to Getting Hammered. Vic Mattis, for the benefit of those who are listening here the first time, is the weekend editor at the Washington Free Beacon. He is also co-host of Getting Hammered, my podcast I recommend to everyone for your morning show any day of the week, any time of the day. Vic, I listened with great interest. I did 9 miles down at Huntington Beach this weekend. First of all, I'm with you on the body mass fat index. It's nonsense.
It is. The idea that I'm supposed to weigh about 140 pounds, I think, based on my height, is just a little bit ridiculous. And again, Mary Catherine talked about, athletes, particularly football players. They're very fit. They're eating a ton. They should not follow these instructions. And so they really need to just change all of these sort of FDA guidelines in order to be accurately reflect what we need and who we are. And then, for a lot of us, leave us alone.
So you had a long conversation about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and I stay away from that because I have very, very mixed feelings about Bobby Kennedy Jr. However, you did talk about the fact that a lot of the senators were reduced to yelling. It's never a good look, do you think, Vic, when you're yelling?
No, because they're going to play that over, and I know how much, the other side hates using certain adjectives such as shrill, but there's no other way to describe some of these senators. I was thinking about Elizabeth Warren, but also Bernie Sanders. And he really got called out because they're talking about the amount of money he received from Big Pharma. And he seemed to suggest that he didn't get anything from these guys and only from, small dollar donations. But of course he's receiving this. And this is not to suggest it's all about being driven by these sort of donations. But you really don't want to get into a screaming match. You're supposed to show that you are have some sort of control and modicum of order.
I don't have the audio. You guys played it. I knew he had gotten into it over the onesie that says "not vaxxed and unafraid," unvaxxed and unafraid. Do you support this onesie? It really was comical.
It is, and I'm not sure who told him that this would be a good idea or who this is catering to, because that didn't work. I mean, as you mentioned, RFK Jr., he really does have his work cut out for him. I don't know if he's going to get all the necessary Republican senators to vote for him, like Bill Cassidy. And certainly a lot of these Democratic senators who traditionally have been on his side, because he's part of the Trump team, they're going to be lockstep. I'll really be surprised if any of he could peel off any of these Democratic senators.
Now I'm going to do a crossover comment for you and for Mary Catherine when she's on this week. I didn't know about the National Report Card until I listened to Getting Hammered, and so I went and looked it up. My God, we're terrible. We can't read. We're not literate. A third of American kids in 8th grade are not literate. That's not something you kind of let move through the system. Ought we not to be taking radical action? And here's Hugh's plan, cooked up at Huntington Beach. Test everybody for literacy. Forget math. You got to be able to read to learn so you can learn. You got to be able to learn to read so you can read to learn. Get literacy organized, segregate by age and grade, and make sure that you don't have 8th graders with 2nd graders. But you got to get kids to read, or they're never going to function, Vic. And we got to go to school year round.
Yeah, I mean, you're seeing this trend. It's been developing, obviously, since COVID, but even before that, where you now hear about students saying that they're not accustomed to reading whole books in college, for example, and that's at the college level. But certainly at the grade school level, they're just not being taught what they need, and they're getting passed through by teachers and obviously teachers' unions that are passing the buck on this. And so we got to get confirmed Linda McMahon. We need a Secretary of Education, and we need a committee to investigate what's going on in higher ed. I think all of these things are very important. And again, we've been talking about this for a long time, and we had been assured that everything is great. The learning, the remote, we do a hybrid thing. It's going to be wonderful. They figured out early on as well, the other side, and I'm talking about Randy Weingarten and the teachers' unions, that this was going to be bad. And that's why you saw them later say, oh, we've all been about bringing, the students back into schools and safely, but we want them back, and trying to say it's not their fault. But we all remember that. And I think a lot of parents remember that, which is why you had this reckoning in 2024. And we need to do something radical.
So, Vic, I'm willing to declare amnesty. Mary Catherine probably isn't, but I'm willing to declare amnesty if they do something to fix it. But it's such an enormous gap. You can't fix it unless you do something differently from what we're doing. Because we've been back in school for 2 years, and the gap got worse. So that means people are falling farther and farther behind in the ability to read. To me, that means no more administrators, everybody in the classroom, and we're gonna focus on reading, and then we're gonna read some more, and we're gonna read. Because if you can't read, you cannot get a job. You can't function.
No, and a lot of these folks on the left who are championing sort of staying at home and supporting, failing schools, they themselves, and we brought this up on the show,
they sent their kids to fancy private schools, and they got to go, to a lot of these schools that were in person while everybody else was shut down. We can't forget about this. This was, of course, even California Governor Gavin Newsom, his children, same situation. There were a lot of, elites on the other side who, they say one thing, but of course they're doing the other. And so we always say, see what they do, not what they say.
So last question, Vic. Did anyone do anything differently after this report card came out? To your knowledge, did any school district anywhere say, "Oh, we've got to do something"?
No, I think there's a lot of talking about it, but what you see is a lot of fights involving these school boards, and there's issues about funding, and there's a lot of problems. You think about Chicago, you think about Los Angeles. They're just, that's just one out of many problems they're trying to deal with. So no. And again, you could spend hundreds of millions of dollars on these things. Are they actually getting to the students? In a lot of cases, they aren't.
They're resigned to the illiteracy of a generation, and I think it's disgusting. But not getting hammered, which is amusing and entertaining and informative. Go get Getting Hammered, subscribe and like it at any podcast you want. Vic Mattis and Mary Catherine Ham. I want to spend a moment on something I was talking about with Vic Mattis that I learned from Getting Hammered. The nation's report card comes out, if not annually, every other year. And it only looks at grades 4 and grades 8, right? Grades 4 and grades 8. Now, grade 4 matters because, as I remember, one of my kids' wonderful teachers, one of the best teachers I ever had, said, grades 1 to 3, you learn to read so that forever thereafter you can read to learn. And literacy, reading, is everything. You really can't function out of a very basic minimum wage, low-skill job unless you can read English in the United States. You cannot do it. You'll be stuck at minimum wage jobs. You got to learn how to read. So when I heard this, I didn't quite believe, so I went and looked it up. This is reading only. I'm not worried about math. I'm worried about reading. Grade 4, and they tested in 2022. The average score is down, the 10th percentile is down, the 25th percentile is down, the 50th percentile is down, the 75th percentile is down. Grade 8, current year 2024, prior year 2022, the average score is down in grade 8. The 10th percentile is down in grade 8. The 25th percentile is down in grade 8. The 50th percentile is down in grade 8. And no significant difference in the 75th and 95th percentile. So we are unlearning how to read. Our students are not being taught how to read. And the pandemic has been over for 2.5 years. So what do I think? I think school districts, public school districts across the United States, have got to radically restructure their school curriculum. And they have to focus on literacy and, to a certain extent, basic numeracy. And they've got to test every kid, and they got to track every kid, roughly by age. So you don't want an 8th grader with a 3rd grader, right? But you could have a 6th, 7th, and 8th grade class on reading. You could have a 3rd and 4th grade class on reading. And wherever they are that you can physiologically get by so that they're not towering over, boys are shaving and toddlers are in the room, you got to be aware of that. But we can't just say 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, high school. We can't do that. We screwed an entire generation, and unless we make it up, and we don't have a lot of time to make it up. So A, take the test, everybody. B, group the people who need to learn how to read and emphasize on read. Get rid of the extracurriculars. Change the teachers, fire the deadwood. And then finally, and most importantly, go to school in the summer until they catch up. It's not hard. And teachers who don't want to do that, leave. Because your job, you have not done your job. Part of that was not your fault. You had knuckleheads as administrators and you closed the schools for 1.5 years or 2 years. But we can't let kids not read. It's a disaster. It's an utter disaster. Learn to read so you can read to learn. And if they're behind, we have to take them out, aggregate them, and teach them how to read. And the public schools fire everybody who isn't teaching people how to read. And I mean that. Everybody. No more administrators. No more field trips. No more nothing until they can read. I think I'll just start the hour by telling you I got 9 miles in on Saturday and 6 on this morning. because of Relief Factor. I'm in the Relief Factor studio. They built it. They paid for it. They're a great sponsor. But I wouldn't take a dime from them if I didn't take their product. That's the deal. And I take their product, and it works. So 15 miles over 3 days, that's not a lot. I'm not fast anymore. Today I was just walking uphill and downhill and uphill and downhill. But I was trundling on Saturday for the 9 and walking for the 6 today. And the reason I'm able to do that without, I mean, I was a little bit sore when I knelt at Mass on Saturday afternoon. I went to Saturday afternoon Mass, but not bad. It was gone. And it's because Relief Factor works to help your body, anti-inflammatory system, actually reduce inflammation. So I'm telling you at the start of the hour, I really do take it. Every day I'm on the air, you see me do it. Relief Factor, because it worked. Because I'm getting older, but I want to go longer. I want to do as much as I can, for as many as I can, for as long as I can. And Relief Factor makes that possible. So here's what you do. If you want to try it, call 1-800, the number 4 and the word relief. 1-800, the number 4 and the word relief. Or go to their website and find Starter Pack 1995. It's 3 weeks supply of Relief Factor, less than $1 a day, and you can try it for yourself at relieffactor.com, relieffactor.com. Now, I put the word out to try and get Bethany Mandel to come in a little bit early because she's scheduled for the next segment, and I asked Generalissimo, could you go and track her down? Because I got to talk to her about at least 2 things. One, I listened to the commentary podcast this morning, and Seth wasn't on it, her husband Seth. But the commentary pod people were wrong for the first time. I really, not wrong. They are correct about economic-only tariffs. Tariffs designed to raise revenue are not a good idea. Tariffs designed to achieve a national security objective are a very good idea. And Bethany Mandel now joins me. Hello, Bethany.
Hi, how are you?
Good. I have 2 things to talk about with you. The nation's report card and tariffs for national security purposes. Let's go in reverse order. Seth was not on the program this morning, so I don't know if he's as badly informed as John Podhoretz, Matt Continetti, Christine Rosen, and Abe Greenwald, but all they were talking about were economic tariffs to raise revenue. These tariffs are intended to stop migration and end fentanyl into the country, right?
So I did not listen to today's podcast, but I think that there is a uniformity to the editorial beliefs of the commentary squad. I am married to one of the commentary squads, so I will tread lightly. But I don't agree. I think that a lot of the commentators that are talking about these tariffs are talking about it purely in economic terms. And when I actually quoted you in a New York Post column that I wrote for tomorrow's paper. It's not a matter of economics. It's a matter of national security, whether it's fentanyl coming from Mexico or, economic espionage coming, not just economic, but all kinds of espionage coming from China. It's long overdue for the American president to be aggressive, and these tariffs are one of those ways.
And late this afternoon, Canada buckled. They're doing a very big border buildup. Mexico is in the process of buckling. And I would never lay off China because China is making the precursor chemicals, and they know what they're doing, in my opinion. Bethany, do you agree with that?
Yeah, there was a funny list that I saw on Twitter of all the countries that have buckled under Trump in the course of the last 2 weeks. Mexico, Panama, Colombia, Venezuela, Canada. It's just the list keeps on going. They don't seem to understand, and this is something that I find truly perplexing, because it's not like Donald Trump is a new figure on the scene. This is all a negotiation tool to him. This is not just a chess game. He's playing 3D chess. He's always played 3D chess. And I don't understand. That's why when I saw all of these tariff conversations, I thought to myself, I wonder what the real objective is here, because it's not tariffs.
No, we're not going to raise that much money from Canada or Mexico, and we might hurt some of our consumers, but I know people who've lost their children to fentanyl. I also, when I was running the Nixon Library, whenever we had a guest speaker arrive, the Moms Against Fentanyl would be in the parking lot to try and get someone to pay attention to fentanyl. It's not the opioid crisis. It's not the Sacklers. They're bad people. They've gotten punished. They're bankrupt. That was OxyContin. This is different. This is putting fentanyl into everything that kids like to try once. But as the First Lady of Virginia says, one pill can kill if you got fentanyl in it.
Yeah. So this is, I think, part of, and this is a conversation you would have to have with Selena to like really get into the depths of it. This is part of the problem with having people in power, both in the media and also in government, who are come from a point of privilege. They don't have a Facebook feed that, when a bad batch hits their hometown, they see obituaries. That's how I grew up. I grew up literally in a trailer park, and there were two periods a couple of years ago where I knew a bad batch had hit my hometown because I saw half a dozen obituaries scroll through my Facebook feed over the course of 2 weeks. This is something that has been impacting normal America for a long time, and the media have completely checked out. The rich privileged class that run the Democratic Party out of the same 20 cities in America, Martha's Vineyard, New York City, LA, Upper West Side of Manhattan, though, they don't seem to understand that this has been the reality for normal America for the last 15 years.
It's funny that you should mention that because I do get the obituaries from the Warren Tribune Chronicle, my hometown. And it is Catholic practice to pray for the dead. So I try and say a little prayer. They're mostly older than I am by 10 or 15 years, sometimes 20 or 30 years. But when I see a 22-year-old or a 25-year-old, inevitably, they don't tell you cause of death, but you're thinking OD. And that is in Fentanyl Alley. And J.D. Vance knows about this. And I'm glad that Trump is doing this. And I hope they bomb the cartels. I really do. Now, Bethany, I want to switch to moms at war. First of all, this is your new Substack. And tell people about it and whether there's a podcast, because I'm going to transition to the Nation's report card after you tell people about this.
Yeah, so it's the momwars.substack.com, starting as a Substack, and we're going to be moving into a podcast in the next week or two. And basically, Cara Kennedy and I saw an opening in the marketplace of the fact that there's not normal mom conversations happening. There's not normal relationship conversations happening. On the far right, there's this sort of deification of trad wives. And on the left, there's the David Hoggs of the world, who say, I'm not going to have kids because I want to drive a Porsche. There is a middle road, and we need to be speaking to Americans who have kids, who want kids, who think that they're a blessing. But there is not a lot of content out there for us, normies. and it goes into the expert sphere too. So many parenting experts are so anxious and so paralyzed by that anxiety that they're giving bonkers advice. One parenting column I read said that a kid was waking up at night because they were hungry, and the columnist said, well, just leave a stick of beef jerky on their nightstand. And I was thinking to myself, I'm like, or just tell them they'll eat in the morning. Call me crazy. I recorded a podcast with Barry Weiss and Nellie Bowles before they had their second child, and the feedback I got from that podcast was unlike anything I've ever gotten. So I decided, there is a market for this, and let's just try to fill it.
Yeah, you, Mary Catherine, and my daughter are all in the same demo, and you've got 6, and Mary Catherine, my daughter, have 4, and they keep citing Emily Oster to me, but it's not something I can consume. So I told my daughter we're going to do a couple of long conversations for podcasts about grandfather, daughter, or grandfather, mom, and because things are different now than when I was raising kids, and I really don't have any advice to give anyone because it's different, right? It's completely different. But I think what you're about to do is long overdue. Let me set the stage for part 2. Mary Catherine and Vic were talking on Getting Hammered about the Nation's report card, and it's called nationsreportcard.gov. And Department of Education does it. Now, run down the stats for the benefit of those people who didn't hear this. They test in 2024 and in 2022 on math and literacy, and they indicate for both the 8th grade and the 4th grade, the average score for reading. I'm going to focus only on reading, literacy here. For the 4th grade, the average score went down, the 10th percentile went down, the 25th percentile went down, the 50th percentile went down, the 75th percentile went down, and there was no significant difference for the 90th percentile, which means they're illiterate anyway. In grade 8, the 2024 to 2022. Average score went down, 10th percentile went down, significant decrease, by the way, is what it calls. Significant decrease for the 25th percentile, significant decrease for the 50th percentile, no significant difference in the 75th and the 90th percentile. So the functionally illiterate kids in the 8th grade didn't get any better either, and everyone else got worse. Bethany, I think this is a crisis. Bethany, did you know about those scores?
Yeah, no, I have been getting so many inbounds from folks about those scores because it's a joke. And I actually joked about it on the Mom Wars Substack because I am judged by, as a homeschooler, my kids are assessed by the public school system. And I think it might be time for the homeschool mom who teaches her children the Bible in the original Hebrew, Plutarch, and Latin, to start assessing the public school kids down the road, because those scores that you cited are actually better than the ones at the public school.
Now, I'm not throwing a complete blanket over all of public education. My grandchildren have gone to public schools. They're super readers because their mom's a super reader. There are books everywhere. Their dad's a super reader. Their grandparents are super readers. All we do is read. So they're all super readers. I'm sure they're in the top 5% of the nation when it comes to their grade school. So it's not all public schools. But Bethany, should this not be a crisis? Because if we turn out a cohort of kids who cannot read, they're doomed in the economy. Are they not?
They're doomed everywhere. And that's the thing that was so frustrating during COVID, was because we were teaching a subset of kids how to read, kindergarten, first, second, who were trying to do that on Zoom, who were trying to do that behind masks and learning from teachers who were wearing masks. That result of you can't sound out a word because, first of all, they're not teaching phonics, but now they can't read anyway. That result is they can't understand a history textbook. They can't understand a science textbook. That ensures their failure across the board. The scores that we're seeing in fourth grade are the result of that COVID generation. And the gaps are just going to continue to get wider, because the kids who can't read in those classrooms are going to be more and more and more disruptive because they're angry and they're bored and they're frustrated. They're going to disrupt learning for the other 20% of the kids who can actually learn. And it's just going to get worse and worse. And I've heard from teachers and administrators that the behavior problems that they've seen since COVID are driving seasoned teachers out of profession, because they have no tools in their toolbox. And the progressive ideologues who are running our education system are pushing restorative justice in schools, which means that when a kid is violent, they sit down and talk to him about their feelings instead of punishing them. That is this is part of why we started the Mom Wars, because this gentle parenting nonsense where you can't dare discipline a child has bled into the school districts. And now kids aren't being disciplined and have boundaries or guardrails in any portion of their life.
Now, my daughter-in-law retired from teaching concurrent with the birth of my son and her's first child, and I don't know what number grandchild it is for me, but it's a big one. And she just said the kids have gone feral, and she had been a teacher for 8 years. I said, can't do it. Not going to do it. Wouldn't be prudent. If she comes back, she'll come back in the Catholic system. Bethany, spell slowly where people can find your Substack.
The MOMWARS.substack.com. The momwars.substack.com.
And you will have a podcast soon?
Yep, hopefully in the next week or two.
So if I were looking at these numbers, and they're awful for fourth grade, because the fourth grade teacher that my daughter had, who was brilliant, August, if you're listening, we love you, said to us in a parent-teacher conference, good news is your daughter's a great reader. Grades 1 through 3, you learn to read so that you can read to learn. Grades 4 through ever. And that grade 1, 2, 3 number, it's so stunning how badly they're reading in fourth grade. I would immediately test every kid in the public school system and resegregate them within age bands. You don't want an 8th grader with a 2nd grader, but 6th, 7th, 8th, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. I would resegregate every classroom for as much reading as they need until they can read. If they can't read, And I would also fire everyone in the school that's not teaching reading, except the janitor. They got to keep it clean. But I don't want guidance counselors. I don't want a librarian. I want reading classes like around the clock. If you can't read, you cannot be part of an advanced economy. Am I crazy?
I mean, they also need to have conversations with parents. This was a frustration during COVID of mine that they decided to just throw every kid on a screen instead of interfacing with every single family. And obviously that's more work, but they would have been, more successful in the long term to sit down and say, what kind of work are you equipped to do with your kid? How can we do more
Good point.
I don't want kids to see reading as drudgery and something that they're being subjected to. So I wouldn't want it to be that rigorous, but I want them to want to read. I want to give them that joy of learning again. And right now in the classrooms, they have to split it up and make smaller groups so that kids who are excelling can excel, and the kids who need extra help get that extra help. I have a friend, Sarah, she teaches third grade in Tennessee, and they weren't closed that long during COVID, and yet she said that in her third grade classroom last year, she had students who couldn't read CVC words. That's consonant, vowel, consonant. Bob, cat, dog. They couldn't read those words. I have a kindergartner who started her kindergarten year being able to read those words. That's how it should be. And honestly, it's an indictment of our school system, but it's also an indictment of parents in our society, because this is a nationwide crisis and there's a lot of bad guys here.
Oh, there are, and I'm giving an amnesty from Hewland. I don't want to score points. I really don't. I just want kids to be able to read. And to do that, we have to shake up the system. Part two, everyone should be going to school year round for 3 or 4 years. We can't afford the summer breaks. And I don't care what your teachers union contract is. It's a national emergency. I don't know if you take a month off. My kids all went to year-round school, K through 8. So they got 4 breaks at 3 weeks a year, and that was great. But public school, by the way. I'm just curious, do you think we got to break the mold in a lot of significant ways because it's broken?
I mean, that requires a willingness to innovate that I don't think exists in the public school system as it is. The only innovation that I've seen is throw kids on screen for 1.5 years so that they could go teach remotely in Puerto Rico. That's the extent of their willingness to innovate. And so, I mean, we should be able to take our tax dollars and go elsewhere to hire teachers, to hire tutors, to do all of these things with people who actually care about children. And that doesn't seem to be the folks who are in charge of public education in many school districts across the country.
Well, this brings me to what the Congress can do. In the budget reconciliation, they can say, it's part of the spending power, if you receive federal funding, it will be cut off unless you offer a backpack voucher of at least 50% of the cost of educating your children so that they can go to a private school. And Tennessee just opened up for 20,000 vouchers, but only Arizona has universal school choice. Everyone, it's not even close to what it costs, but it's $5,000 or $6,000 or something. You can get someone to teach your kid for $6,000 how to read. To me, it's that simple. Yeah. Ought it to be that simple? Congress to demand it?
I mean, something really drastic needs to be done because this is a national emergency. I have loved watching President Trump. I honestly, my most controversial take is I'm glad he lost in 2020 because he had 4 years to come out the gate swinging, and Lord has he.
Yes.
He's talked about breaking down the Department of Education, and he needs to, Congress needs to take that fire that's under Trump and run with it also. We have control, Republicans have control of the House and the Senate. You have no excuses. Go for it, friends.
And what do you say as a mom to a child who is not reading well and is in a not so good public school that doesn't seem to care? What's the mom war's advice?
Sit on my lap and let's read a book. Let's keep reading together. Build a library, go to the library, and it is your job to sit with your kid and read to them and make it fun. But, this is your job as a parent to make sure that they don't come out of their schooling without a love of reading and without the ability to read.
I want to end it there. I can't do better than that. Bethany Mandel, themomwars.substack.com. Podcast coming to you soon. Thank you for coming early and staying long, Bethany. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Hugh.
I've been, my focus is on national security, and Canada crumbled today. Donald Trump beat Mexico and Canada today. He beat Colombia last week. I don't know what he's going to do about China. China is a much tougher nut to crack, and we're at war with them. You may not know it. He did, however, say something about the Middle East, which I'll come back and cover. It isn't. Mr. Witkoff thinks it's going well. I am in awe of Gadi Moses. He's 80 years old. He survived 16 months, a lot of it in solitary confinement, counting tiles, walking 7 kilometers. Okay, 10K is 6 miles, 6.2 miles, so 7 kilometers is what? More than 3.1 and less than 6.2. I'm not a math guy. But he walked at least 4 miles a day in his cell to keep himself sane. It is going to be one of the great dissident books ever written if Gadi Moses sits down and writes about living in hell with the Hamas terrorists for 16 months. And he came out smirking at them. They call them kibbuznikim. I don't know. I'm going to talk to Aviv Redigur about that tomorrow because I'm absolutely inspired. Same time they had to let a bunch of killers go when they did that. Donald Trump is not an optimist, by the way. Cut number 8.
These tariffs.
On the Middle East, Mr. President, if I may, do you still have doubts that the ceasefire will hold?
On what?
On the Middle East, do you think the ceasefire will hold?
I have no assurances that it'll hold. I mean, I've seen people brutalized. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. No, I have no guarantees that the peace is going to hold. Steve, you might want to say something about that. Steve Witkoff?
It's holding so far. So, and we're certainly hopeful, and that's the president's direction. Get the hostages out and save lives and come to hopefully a peaceful settlement of it all. So far it's
Bibi's
holding.
coming tomorrow, and he's going to be in the room with Donald Trump, and they're going to figure out what happens next. They're old friends. They'll figure it out. Richie Valens, Buddy Holly, many other people died on this day in 1959. So I was told about that by my friend Glenn last night. But okay, we'll play music from those who died in the Winter Dance Party plane crash in 1959. While we were at dinner, I already mentioned this already, as I was leaving, made eye contact with a guy I thought I knew, but I couldn't place it. I said, yeah, I think, no, that can't be. And I walked on, and he was kind of looking at me like, I think I know you. And he subsequently posted, hey, Hugh Hewitt, were you dining at this restaurant last night? And I said, I thought so, rats. I didn't talk to Jim Palmer, Hall of Famer, who owned the Indians forever. So we'll get together some other time. He's got to go back and call the O's games. Got to get him before he goes to spring training. But, I mean, a legend. Just a legend. So the SI of my youth is full of stories about Jim Palmer. I think won World Series games in 3 decades. I think, is that the fun fact to know and tell about that Hall of Famer? Amazing. Now, I'm excited about this Nation's report card because I love to read and I grew up reading. And I love to talk to authors. And I love to read books. And I listen to books on tape, but doesn't substitute for reading. And I remember very well, now Warren, Ohio was lucky. We had a Carnegie library. And Andrew Carnegie built these all over the world, all over the country. And you can drive through mostly older towns and you'll see a Carnegie library. And it's the same footprint everywhere. So we had a Carnegie library, and Tuesday night was library night. I didn't realize it was really mom's night without the 3 boys, because my dad would take the 3 kids, I'm the youngest of the 3, and we would go to the library for a couple of hours and check out a bunch of books, and hell to pay if you lost a book, right? There were fines, etc. But it was 2 hours that mom didn't have to do anything except what she wanted to do. And who knows? She probably took a nap, 3 boys. And going to the library was a deal. Look forward to it. It was a lot of fun, and you were safe. You wander around, I mean, kids section, teenager section, lots of books, check out 6 or 7. They had summer reading programs. if you cannot read, I really don't know anyone who can't read. So I'm not mocking you. There are adult literacy programs, and there are certainly ESL programs that are available to new arrivals in the country who want to learn how to read in English. I don't know what you do if you can't read. And I know that until relatively recent in human history, more than 90% of the people were illiterate. And 90% of people spent 90% of their income on bread. So we're living in the best of times, the worst of times. But we can't go backwards on literacy. It would be incredibly bad to go backwards on literacy. So I don't know what the Department of Education does, but whatever they're doing, they're not doing it well. If our country cannot read, then we're not doing it well. So listen, if you're a superintendent or you're a member of the Board of Education, you ought to really bring up, when are we going to test our kids for reading? And if our kids are not reading to grade, what are we going to do about those children? We need to track them. Now, tracking, I think, I was never tracked. Catholic schools didn't have enough money to make tracks. But tracking became discriminatory in its outcome. Only certain sets of kids were in there, and they got funny names attached to them. Well, no one can read. Everyone's going backwards. So you can break out the really bright kids, and they can go off and read, at 10th grade level if they're in 4th grade. Whatever their reading level is, kids can read at that level, and there are people that can figure out those books. But we also ought to go to longer school years, and we ought to cut out all the vacation days. Really. School in teacher days? No more. The kids can't read. The kids can't read. And God bless Governor Lee and our friends at Job Creators Network and our friends who are for school choice. The only way to break this is to break the public schools, because they won't change. They won't do anything. They're turning out illiterates, and they don't care. They look at the numbers. Oh, too bad they can't read. This cannot go on. The country won't be able to compete. The Marines can't save everybody. They've got to be able to read. So, and there endeth my rant for the day. That nation's report card, if you're in education and if you aren't shocked by that and you're not doing something different today, bad on you. You're not a professional, because whatever you're doing isn't working. They can't read, you are a failure. Don't blame it on COVID. It's been 5 years since COVID. 4 years at least. If you can't make it up, then go to school in the summer. Summer school for everybody. Because if you can't read, you're doomed. During the break, Generalissimo informed me that Joe Biden has signed a deal with the Creative Artists Agency, CAA, the biggest in the world. Generalissimo, I hesitate to tell you how to do Dwayne's World, your podcast. I hesitate, but I think when Lilacs comes on next, when will that be?
It'll drop on Friday. I'll tape them on Thursday.
Okay. I would suggest that maybe you two brainstorm what kind of projects Joe Biden could do for CAA.
Corn Pop, the biopic.
Could be Corn Pop. I was thinking more along the lines of true crime. How to launder money. Documentaries on trains. I suppose there's a memoir in there that they can ghost and sell a lot of as a book stop.
Well, look, for 4 years, Joe Biden was spouting fiction in his head.
Oh, you're right. We could do fiction. Are we afraid that he'll give away national security stuff? Like they were worried about Trump telling the Russians thing. He is non-compos mentis part of the time.
It's going to be like Oliver Stone, right?
Well, I've got a speaking agency, the Washington Speakers Bureau, and they call me up and they offer me ridiculous money to go places and talk, and that's fine. But I normally can amuse and tell a few stories and entertain and elucidate and inform. Do you think Joe Biden can give a speech?
I don't think so. Seriously, how many? He's going to get, what, six digits a throw, right?
Oh, yeah. A lot of money.
Right.
Maybe if he gets any. I really don't know that I would book him.
He's going to do one, maybe two speeches, and they are going to be so panned that nobody else will hire him.
I think maybe Dr. Jill is in on that deal, because I would listen to her. I'd go to a speech that Dr. Jill Biden would. I'm here to tell you, there's a reason that really old actors don't get parts.
Actually, do you know what Joe will do with his CAA deal? He will develop the miniseries of Joe Biden's second term.
Maybe a West Wing kind of thing.
Yeah.
All I want to do is say Dwayne's World is Dwayne's podcast, comes out on Tuesdays and Fridays, right?
Wednesdays
and Fridays. And you should download it because he'll spend more time on that than I will. I don't want to spend any more time on that. I want to go to Sean Duffy, our new Secretary of Transportation, talking with Jake Tapper yesterday about DEI and safety cut number 12.
So you just alluded to DEI, the diversity, equity, and inclusion processes of trying to expand people in the workforce. Is there any specific evidence that backs up Donald Trump's claims, President Trump's claims, that DEI or FAA hiring practices are responsible in any way for this tragedy at Reagan National?
So, Jake, I think the better question is, am I going to guarantee the American people that only the best and the brightest serve in this incredibly important body of the Department of Transportation, that they're driven by safety and DEI doesn't matter? So I do know that in the last administration, they were focused on not safety, but they were focused on changing the name from cockpit to flight deck. Or notice to airmen, they want to change it to notice to air mission. They focused on EVs and sustainability and racist roads, things that don't matter in regard to safety. Our mission since the start has been safety. And they've lost that mission. And we see when you don't focus on safety and you focus on social justice or the environment, bad things happen. And so listen, it's been busy. We're going to have a fuller assessment of what happens in regard to DEI in FAA and DOT. And we'll report that out. But I will tell you this, DOT is a big department. The only DEI office that exists in the whole department was at the FAA. Now, that existed up to a week ago. That's now gone.
Go to Brian Mast on Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan. See, inside the Beltway, there's an obsession with DEI. And it's because the people who are talking about it are white, privileged people who are making a lot of money. Margaret Brennan and Brian Mast cut 15.
Was purging of people throughout the State Department, other agencies, where we're freezing aid. These are all very important and necessary steps to make sure that we secure America, and we're going to support that.
I'm sorry, can I follow up on what you just said there? You want to authorize purging of State Department personnel? What does that mean exactly?
Well, if you want to take a look at the State Department, where DEI has been a priority over, let's say, diplomacy in many accounts, I could give you hundreds of examples of where they were authorizing.
What proof do you have of that?
Sure. Let's list them off. $500,000 to expand atheism in Nepal, $50,000 to do, let's see, a transgender opera in Colombia, $47,000 to do an LGBTQ trans comic book in Peru, $20,000 a pop to do drag shows in Ecuador. Shall I continue with more examples of where DEI was the priority?
It certainly seems like there could be a review of things. Foreign aid, as you know, is less than 1% of the entire
blah,
federal
blah,
budget.
Margaret, you got smacked. He came with receipts. Let me put it bluntly. DEI is unconstitutional when practiced by a government actor. And it's usually against the Civil Rights Act of 1964 when practiced by a private actor. But if the government is taking account of your race, your gender, your ethnicity, your country of origin, or your religion, it's violating the Constitution at any level, at any time. It is not allowed. It is unconstitutional. For a long period, way too long, from Bakke until last year, you could get away with smudging, all right, messing around with race, gender, ethnicity, country of origin, and religion in admissions at higher ed, but no more. The court has ended it. So if you are spending $1 of a limited budget on a program promoting other than your core mission, it's a wasted dollar. And if you poison an entire agency, you debilitate the entire agency. There may not be actual cause, but there may be proximate cause. You may be able to find out that the money wasted over decades on DEI initiatives, what they used to call affirmative action, what they call goals and timetables, it's had 100 names. It's doing other than focusing on the core mission and on merit. If you've spent $1 on it, you've been off course. And if you're in the government, you've been acting unconstitutionally, and you're probably acting unlawfully in the private sector. Stop it. Stop it. We're not going to do that anymore. Donald Trump won. People want to be safe. They don't care. I don't care who's driving the plane. I really don't. They can be LGBTQ. They can be any race, either gender. I do not care if they're a good pilot. And in the tower, there are good people. Today is the day the music died, the anniversary of the crash that took Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, and many others, the Big Bopper. So pay a little homage to that. I think it might be the day that U.S. Agency for International Development died. Donald Trump said this in the Oval Office earlier today, cut number 5.
The first term, though, USAID was something that you liked in some respects.
I love the concept of it.
Had some programs.
Sure, I love the concept, but they turned out to be radical left lunatics. And the concept of it is good, but it's all about the people.
All about the people, and where does the money go? And they didn't want Elon Musk to do an audit, or the Musketeers. And Marco Rubio said, well, you know, I'm running the agency now. I'm the acting head. It's got 10,000 employees. Some of them do excellent work stopping AIDS in Africa, curing disease. I'm sure that the Department of State can keep that going. But I may have to cancel the Financial Times if they buy into this lunacy. Financial Times this morning, the future of the main U.S. agency for foreign aid is in doubt after its headquarters were unexpectedly closed on Monday with staffers ordered to work from home after President Donald Trump said it was run by radical lunatics. Aid workers, diplomats, and lawmakers have been trying to make sense of a series of ominous incidents. They're not ominous. At the U.S. Agency for National Development, its website is down. So, some officials have lost access to emails. So, some have been put on leave. So, there are suggestions it will be absorbed in the State Department. So what? So what? If the Congress appropriates money with a specific directive, the president must spend that money under the Budget Control and Impoundment Act of 1974, which he can challenge the constitutionality of. He cannot change that. But maybe Congress ought to get into the earmark business, because USAID has gone off the rails. And Brian Mast, let's play again. Margaret Brennan, he brought the receipts. I want to hear that again. Cut number 15.
Was purging of people throughout the State Department, other agencies, where we're freezing aid. These are all very important and necessary steps to make sure that we secure America, and we're going to support that.
I'm sorry, can I follow up on what you just said there? You want to authorize purging of State Department personnel? What does that mean exactly?
Well, if you want to take a look at the State Department, where DEI has been a priority over, let's say, diplomacy in many accounts, I could give you hundreds of examples of where they were authorizing.
What proof do you have of that?
Sure. Let's list them off. $500,000 to expand atheism in Nepal, $50,000 to do, let's see, a transgender opera in Colombia, $47,000 to do an LGBTQ trans comic book in Peru, $20,000 a pop to do drag shows in Ecuador. Shall I continue with more examples of where DEI was the priority?
It certainly seems like there could be a review of things. Foreign aid, as you know, is
yeah, there could be. That you're right. $50,000 on a trans opera in Colombia. I know a lot of people in America could use $50,000.